adventuring party for the second week of March 2020. This week falls to me to defend gamers everywhere from the scourge of the old school revival, as it once again raises its misshapen head. Wait, I thought I was the pro OSR party member. The adventuring party, discussing tabletop and related gaming and the Irish gaming scene, so you don't have to.
Welcome to the party. I'm still Savage.
I'm Shane.
And I remain Conrad.
Okay. Conrad, thanks for coming back. Another week, another Conrad. Another bun fight. This week, we're going back to the past. We're going back to a previous episode.
Once again to the Renegade Master.
We're going back to the OSR. The old school revival, which has been discussed in the past on the Adventure Party. Shane,
my sufferance, yes.
Well, Shane, you in the past had some very unpleasant, probably undeserved things to say about the OSR. And Conrad, you stormed into my bedroom one Sunday morning. I was propped up on about 18 pillows reading the Sunday papers, which had been fetched for me by a rather intelligent rapscallion. And you threw down...
Well, he's your son.
No, you threw down a bundle of notes at my feet, parchment, on which you'd ascribed a retaliation to this unconscionable attack on the old sad
doors.
The old sad recidivists, as I've come to think of them. For I was, as many of the listeners probably remember, Shane being my favourite presenter on the Adventuring Party, and your episode on the OSR was the thing that really inspired me to start sharing my unwarranted diatribes with the world. So thank you, Shane.
I still don't understand. Every time I listen to this episode, I see myself struggling to be so positive, yet everyone else has heard this excoriating diatribe of me burning the entire institution to the ground.
Shane Carr is mad as hell. He's not taking it anymore.
So, why are you so full of hate?
I'm not full of hate. I'm full of confused rage.
That's exactly what someone who is full of hate would say. But carry on.
Okay.
Well, hold on. Is this my drink?
Well,
I thought I put lime in my drink. I forgot to put the lime in my drink.
Yep.
Okay, drinking it limeless.
Okay.
The OSR.
That is the kind of high stakes, high rolling operation this is. Carry on.
I should have had that rapscallion fix the drink.
Yeah, true.
So we've got the old school revival.
Mm-hmm.
And why am I looking at you, Shane? Conrad, we've got the old school revival, which is a movement inside of D&D that sort of says, weren't things better back in the old days? Why do all the kids have to be streaming and playing with the challenge ratings and counting everything upwards? Why can't we go back to, pencil smudges and taco, and isn't it nice when we all gather round to beat up orcs, because they're different? And then, Shane, on the other side, we've got new D&D, I think is how I like to think of it, because new NU D&D, like new metal, and all of its damning connotations. See, I have no dog in this race. I take no prisoners, and a pox on both your houses. New D&D, it's all about floppy hair and being sort of positive and not really paying attention to any of the bleeding rules and never min-maxing.
I'm not sure I like this new impartial Savage. It's very upsetting. But okay, let me just start by setting out my case.
Yeah, let's rehash the hateful things you've said.
So, if I can reiterate my point about the OSR, it is that it is a wonderful mine of ideas and examinations of old game mechanics and game systems, what they were useful for, why they went away, and it exposes a vast amount of lost knowledge to the wider gaming sphere and helps to bring back some stuff that still seems like probably fun gameplay. But as a whole, I just keep running hell-mel into these walls of pretension and catchphrases and assumed wisdoms that have just sort of built up over 15 years of hating 3.5 that I just can't let them stand.
He's making a claw, people. He's making a claw. Watch him clawing at the air. Go ahead, yes. But tell us how you really feel.
I really didn't realise we got under his skin quite so much. This is wonderful.
Would you like to swing back, Mr. King?
Yeah, let's finally hear from the doddering opposition.
Well, the old school Renaissance, as it generally styles itself, I find it interesting. Going back to your point about all the kids be streaming and such. What I find really interesting about that is that the OSR was only actually made possible by technology. It was made possible by blog technology, and it was made possible by print-on-demand technology. Because
I was just going to say, my impression is they're a bunch of book fetishists.
Absolutely, they make beautiful, beautiful things. But because with the advent of the sort of the easily accessible blog, people who liked simpler versions of Dungeons and Dragons were able to get in contact with each other, and there was this tremendous flowering of some tremendously creative stuff, like Grognardia, which I think is the granddaddy of all the OSR blogs, and my favourite, the Blood of Prokopius. But there was all sorts of excellent stuff, and that is still going. Now, what I would see at the heart of the OSR is that there are games that feature simpler, less customizable roles, but simpler and more customizable rules. If you throw a rock at someone who writes OSR on their game, it is the chances of you hitting the same game twice are ridiculously slim, because as a tribe, they're very fond of hacking things, of sort of taking it apart, and that DIY ethos and aesthetic is a huge part of that sort of D&D subculture. The way I see it is that the OSR emphasizes a couple of key points, and it is less it is to a certain extent an aesthetic, but I don't think, weirdly, it's driven by nostalgia, because if that was the case, it would have burned out already. Mm-hmm. This is a movement that's still burning after, it sort of came about after when Osric came along, so about sort of 2006, 2007-ish, mm-hmm. and it's still going 13 years later. If it was just nostalgia, it would have moved on by now. It is clearly feeding something in the gaming public, and there is a small but significant minority of people who really enjoy that style of play. Now, I'm going to give Shane a right reply there.
I've got a question for both of you now. Yeah. So why isn't this just an edition war? Because it is fair to say the OSR almost exclusively sort of tend to draw from pre-3.5, mm-hmm. at least in the initial flush. There's been weird emanations into other places. Whereas new D&D is best because it is the D&D that is built upon all of the previous D&Ds, taking fresh ideas and never looking back, only looking forward.
You might be mixing me up with Sean here. I certainly...
I did that a couple of episodes ago. He looked aghast at me. I was a bit worried for a second.
Just launch across the table and throttle you. But it's okay.
So why isn't this just an edition war?
Well, partly it is what Conrad said, is that because it's not married to a particular edition, it's married to a particular style, which certain editions and certain types of GMing bring out more. The idea of more emphasis on the game that happens at the table over the game that happens at the character creation session. A general emphasis on exploring all of the different editions and rule sets and rules light hacks and such to put together a game for the table. Not there's no single OSR game. Each OSR game is sort of designed for the writer's own table and the writer's own playstyle.
Cult-like activity. Okay, so Conrad, why isn't this just an edition war?
Because it's not really about editions. Just off the top of my head, I can think of OSR games like the Black Hack, ICRPG, Scarlet Heroes, Stars Without Numbers. Those are for what's in there. You've got a game that just deals with one player, one DM, doing Oriental D&D. You've got two different versions of standard D&D. You've also got a science fiction game. There's BX Gangbusters, which decides to take basic Dungeons and Dragons and turn it into a gangster game. The thing about the OSR is its tremendous fecundity and its wild diversity of ideas and different things. Now, firstly, I sort of I'm bored of trying to define it, but for the sake of argument, we'll go. I think the three things that really stand out to me about OSR style games are the massive importance of player agency and player skill, in that it's not a case where you can just sort of roll a dice and go, well, my character would know the answer to that question. You have to work things out yourself. I'm not saying that there aren't puzzles in older games, but in newer games, but there is a greater emphasis on it. There is also an emphasis on sandbox play, where did the party want to go? Excellent, that's where we'll go. And it's less narratively bound, because I think it draws on a slightly less, and this is to my second point, it is less narratively driven, in that it's more about the game that happens at the table and not trying to sort of Kango hammer that into a sort of a narrative box. In terms of player agency, there are three things that I think are very important to that. Firstly, the sandbox play, because the DM presents you with a couple of opportunities and the players take them and make them of what they will. Secondly, combat isn't treated as a sport. It's treated as a life or death conflict.
See previous episode of the Action Party.
That you know, only idiots pick fair fights. If you can achieve the goal without fighting, brilliant. And there's no expectation of fairness. I mean, one of the things that I know that from talking to friends who DM 5th edition is that there's a heavy emphasis on CRs and how do you structure an encounter. OSR DMs don't really care about that. They just sort of go, okay, you met a red dragon, you're second level. If you try and take this guy on, you're going to die, so you're going to have to think fast and what you want to do. And I love that, because you own your successes and you own your failures. And while I've played very few or run very few OSR games, that ethos is one that really appeals to me. And I think it's a reaction to, in some ways, the kind of gaming that came into D&D with Dragonlance, where it was very narratively driven. Or, what was it, the Vampire, the Transylvania Chronicles, the White Wolf were very fond of campaigns where the players didn't actually get to do much, but they saw cool NPCs doing things and got to observe that. And yes, there is a certain element of book fetishism. There seem to be a huge number of graphic designers in the old school Renaissance. And I, for one, am all for this, because they've produced beautiful, beautiful stuff. Dolmenwood is gorgeous. There are any number of OSR products which just look fantastic and make you think about the way game books are structured to make them useful at the table rather than things to be read.
Okay, Shane, free fire round.
Conrad has done an excellent job of explaining all of the best parts of the OSR. A lot of my complaints about it come from having to sift through the deeper lore. In particular, there's this document going around, the OSR Principles, which purport to be a sort of Bible.
That sounds like a manifesto. Dangerous
I think
stuff.
it actually is. I think some version of it is actually called a manifesto. It's filled with these bullet pointy, grand proselytization statements. Then, like, inevitably pages of people expanding them away. This is an amazing, never before grasped truth of the real role playing that was hidden away from us by the Wizards of the Coast acquisition of TSR. And
Conrad's shaking his fist. The hated corporate overlords that took the fun out of the game.
None of these are, well, okay.
And some
of these are perfectly accurate. Some of them
Gygax didn't die a pauper, mate. There's a statue to him somewhere, isn't there?
Is there?
Yeah, I think
good
so.
for him.
Now, so Shane, you were saying, this is a bit of a.
I think the OSR in its heyday got into the habit of using one-liners, essentially, like these grand nuggets of truth that were supposed to be inviolate, and thinking about them would make you suddenly cast off your aspirations of modern gaming and dive deep into the
Okay, can you give us an example?
Well, there's a classic rulings not rules, which we've already done an episode about. Well, to which I say,
for the benefit of those just joining us,
it's the idea that it is virtuous to have your rule system be incomplete, because that allows GM more agency to craft the rules to their setting, which is fine GM advice. I would not consider it good game design advice.
We're slicing the pie in interesting ways. GMs are the ones that read all the books, as it were. Players hardly ever. And game designers, I'm not sure they...
I think that there are generations of legislative drafters who would look to the common law approach of a couple of basic principles that can be interpreted rather than trying to codify everything, and think that, that's perhaps not a bad way of doing things.
Back in your foxhole. Keep going.
Well, I could expand, but no.
Now you have the opportunity to spit fire.
I could do that. I could do it, but I don't want to get stuck on one.
He's got notes.
Good man.
There's 2 pages. There's 3 pages of these damn.
And a random roll table.
Oh my God. I could. Do you want me?
Being properly OSR.
D20,
here we go.
Randomly determine which of these I will tell you.
Absolutely.
Being properly OSR, I've brought notes, but it's actually a series of bullet points that go to 3/4 of a page.
I'm very sorry, folks. You're about to hear a great big sort of peach-sized dice rolling on the table. So I've got a D20.
Okay.
So here we go. We're going to count off the top. 12. Mm-hmm. So Shane is going down through his notes. And really, I wouldn't know where he stops. So it's really a case of we'll see what he picks for us to hear from. Conrad, while he's up to this...
no, I've done.
Oh, here we go. Count to the 12 fast.
There's this old chestnut. The idea of player skill over character skill. Or I've seen this done for other things, is like player ingenuity being superior to any form of character skills or stat. And the one that really gets my goat. The answer to your question is not on your character sheet, which is a lie, because the answer to every question in the OSR is to set it on fire, and you write down how much alchemist fire you have on your character sheet.
Okay, we're going to give Shane a moment to climb down off that tower of rage.
Mop his brow. And
Conrad, you've been on your stool. Come out of the corner.
Yes. Well, I can sort of see Shane's point when he talks about sort of a manifesto full of grand proclamations. But if he'd imbibed the spirit of the OSR in any meaningful sense, he would have realised that he shouldn't care a fig for any of those, and he should go make his own game.
Then why buy into any OSR product then? Because they are product driven.
Because
they
they're
do
product driven.
Books.
Because a lot of them are really, really good. Scarlet Heroes is excellent. Stars Without Number is also excellent. Dolmenwood is excellent. The Midderlands is a fantastic piece of game design, where someone has taken sort of 12th century England, given it a slight twist, and turned out some absolutely excellent RPG material. But I'm not saying that you should love everything about the OSR, because there's plenty about it that's absolutely dross, as is the rule with everything. 90% of everything is dross. Mm-hmm.
See previous episodes. There's like 500 plus in them.
Exactly.
Pick wisely.
But what I am saying is that the gems that it has produced in recent years really stand out to me. And as for player skill, absolutely, player skill is important. That's why we're playing a game. I mean, if I just wanted to sort of, play a game where I played a detective, and I'll roll my solve crime skill and we'll move on.
I think you've punched that straw man a couple of times now. I think that's just indicative of bad gaming rather than being built into any particular school of RPGs.
Well, we demand the people, lots of games, 3.5, first amongst them, demand that players use clever tactics when in combat. Why shouldn't they use cleverness in other aspects of the game? Why should that be restricted to the to battle?
But that's exactly the point I'm making. It's almost always down to what you say to get past the guard, rather than what your diplomacy check comes out as.
That's GMing styles, I think.
That's GMing styles, yeah. I wouldn't. I'm not sure I'd lay that one at the feet
as I said,
of new D&D.
It's not a game. It's sort of an ethos.
Yeah, it's a kind of a fuzzy, hard to pin down bag of smoke.
My point. Okay. Well, spoilers at the end of this.
It's fair to say though that the other side of this coin isn't terribly concrete either. I mean, you complain about rulings, not rules. But new D&D, as it stands today, is, to my mind, beset by correction by Twitter, where you've got people firing very specific rule questions at the likes of Chris, what's his name?
Chris Perkins?
Chris Perkins. And he'll come out with 140...
No, it's James Crawford.
James Crawford is the main guy, yeah.
He's the two of them.
But he comes back with 140 characters of... oh yes, that's how it is, or oh no, we've designed it this way. And I mean, to compile, I'm waiting for the big book of D&D Twitter.
I'm sure there's a website
to be released.
Literally just that.
You're talking? Is it on
sageadvice.eu? I'm pretty sure it's just a archive of all of the.
It'd be nice in the 7 years that they had to develop the game that they'd gotten it into book form where I could refer to it instead of having to run to.
Suggesting some form of new edition of the game.
Well, we'll get to that one in a future episode. But I think it's fair to say that both sides could be accused of being vague on particular things.
Well, I mean,
while claiming to be super concrete on others.
No, I mean that's one of the things about the OSR. It's super hand wavy. But I mean, we have national legislatures who draft rules that can result in people being sent to prison for years that are appealed, declared unconstitutional. Writing rules. Obviously they're writing laws, but game designers are writing rules. It's hard, and it's incredibly hard to get right. So you should have a couple of general woolly sort of principles, like, some sort of constitution, to help you interpret the rules and to decide what they mean today in this particular situation with these particular people.
Which is something that principles, such as this list of stuff, are good for, but they should be guidance, not repeated ad nauseum on all the blogs to pass as commandments.
I'm terribly sorry, Shane, that gamers are enthusiastic about their game. How terrible for you.
Well, they are. That's why they seek out clarifications on the rules from the people making them. And sometimes they seek out general principles under which to live. Yeah. I think there's a version here where it's the rule of law, the codified law versus rules of ethics being sort of played out in this entirely contrived, I have to remind you, war between the OSR and new D&D. From my place in the sidelines, I've rolled up on the carriage, unpacked the picnic to watch the Civil War unfold. But it is for me a civil war. These are two sides who are engaged in the same sort of game, more or less. And when you really get down to it, if you go under the sheets and watch how the nasty is done, a lot of it looks the same.
Absolutely.
Most of the time.
5th edition is probably the most OSR edition of D&D since first.
Yeah. Railing against 3.5 does feel like perhaps this protest would have been more timely 10 years ago.
I must admit, I can't actually recall the last time I heard someone rail against 3.5, but I'll bow to Shane.
You've led us into a briar patch then.
Yeah.
Well, okay, the narrative, as I've found it, is that 3.5 led the charge into this very deterministic game where the campaign was sort of written at character creation, and
and was very character led.
Yeah,
like you were looking to, like GM was looking to his players to determine the shape of the campaign, whereas the OSR sort of says, here is the geography, and off you go into it, and we'll find out what happens on the way.
I think
like the hex map
I think you're sort of making a distinction without a difference there, Savage, because I think one of the characteristics of OSR games is that they tend to be very player led.
In a different sense.
Okay, well,
yes. It's up to the players as to where you go inside this hex map. Whereas the 3.5 era, at least, it was like, we'll draw the hex map after we find out what the players want.
Okay.
Is the way I'm kind of choosing to interpret some of this. Now, I think D&D, on the new D&D side, has moved on from that. I think the OSR is much more than a renaissance. I feel like it is actually moving forward into places where a potential next edition of D&D is going to go anyways. So in many ways, a sort of a vanguard. Vanguard at the front of the book. No.
Vanguard.
A vanguard.
Vanguard Savage is the word
front,
you're looking for.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Not the rear guard.
No.
We should be at the rear.
Yes.
Leading me to be so correct.
Yes.
So often. But OSR looks like a vanguard from my point of view. Yeah. New D&D looks like what it is, which is the sort of the place where you start and branch out from.
I honestly think in many ways it was a reaction against 4th edition.
I like 4th edition. I think we threw out a lot of babies with that bathwater.
I think that the spark was 3.5 and its style, but like 4th edition was the gasoline, as it were.
Yeah, in that I can appreciate 4th edition as a piece of design. It's just not a game I want to play.
Yeah, lots of good ideas applied in a very measured way. What you really wanted were drum solos and crazy spikes and all sorts of good fun, which 5th Ed has sort of given us. Mm-hmm. OSR is showing us the weird places that we're going to go, and in a weird way reminding us of all the things that have been left on the ground along the way. Hex maps don't get a look in most new official D&D products, and they're a really strong sort of way of bringing territory into the game.
Weirdly, and just going back to your point there, the OSR is a creature of 3rd edition, because if it wasn't for the OGL, you wouldn't be able to have this immense flowering of creativity, because it's the open gaming license that makes it possible to write all these different versions of D&D.
Oh yeah, because it sort of opened all the previous editions when it opened 3.5.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that really is a great place to land for this one, because it puts lie to this idea that there's actually a war within D&D.
I don't think it's a war.
And those who choose, like I have done, because I have to now come from behind the curtain and admit that I have played both sides against a theoretical centre. I'm delighted that we have D&D in the place it is today. I think 5th Ed is a very strong edition to move forward from. I'm delighted that the OSR is reminding people of all of the good things that exist in the 50 years of the hobby at this point, that sometimes get forgotten in pursuit of the new.
At this point, with the 30-minute mark, I think it's time for me to drop the charade. I am currently running a 5th Ed game based on the classic Isle of Dread hex map.
Love it.
And I've run
dinosaurs.
And I've run a successful Stars Outnumber campaign, which is what got this whole thing started in the first place. Now to think about it, but the OSR is a wonderful well of creativity. You just have to watch out for it
does generate some lunatics.
Yes,
that
it
is
does.
Absolutely 100% true.
And definitely, if you fall down a hole and start mass reading 20-year-old blogs, which I've done, don't take any one blog as wisdom, and if anything has put out a bullet point, be ready to question it. But I don't think there's anything wrong with being carefully looking through an OSR product and just mining it for ideas and see this ethos means something to a lot of people. It's not perfect for everyone, and it's not RPG gospel, but neither is 5th edition.
You'll not be taken to D&D court for playing D&D wrong.
Yes, exactly. I think that is the I think that is the strongest part of the OSR ethos, is that there's no wrong way to play your game. You just have to just look for a way that works for you, and maybe you want a nice simple game where you can pick up with 5 armed strangers and you don't have to worry about having to think too hard or have to worry about vermicitude, or maybe you want a deep in the trenches, goblins with machine guns, wacky OSR fun where you go through 5 character sheets before you've picked up your sword.
Well, on the OSR side, I think it's much better to think about the OSR.
I thought we just established that there are no sides.
Well, if I'm going to keep flip-flopping, I might as well go back on my previous...
Someday this war is gonna end.
Well, the OSR, we don't necessarily have prophets so much as explorers who are returning with tales from far lands rather than spinning truths out of hats. Truths in inverted commas. On that quite nebulous note, I want to thank both of you for being sort of game for this. I've been threatening...
You're very welcome.
I've been threatening your listeners, and I've been threatening both of you with this showdown for quite some time.
3 pages of diatribe notes wasted.
I'm looking at a field of notes left like soldiers on the battlefield on both sides. I'm glad to say everyone showed up with ammunition. But at this
dealing
point...
with ammunition and its radioactive aftertaste, well, is something for future generations to worry about.
Well, I think there's a bright and happy future for D&D in general. I suspect there'll be a reconciliation after the war as we move forward in the editions. No one's quite sure if that'll be a 0.5 or a 6 or what it's going to look like. Could be that we get D&D Endless, where it's constant updates from Matt Mercer as he ruling rules and sort of hex maps his way into infinity. But for now, thank you, Conrad, for joining us.
You are very welcome.
Where can we find you on the internet?
You can find me on Joy and Forgetfulness at Blogger, which is basically fallen on its arse because I have 2 small children now and can't update it often. But I do have a podcast on Anchor and Spotify called Send 3 and 4pence, where you can hear me witter about gaming, books, and the law.
Shane, where can we find you on the internet?
Funnily enough, I heard this new podcast called The Adventuring Party come out of nowhere. No one's listening to it.
So they're sort of angry, fighty, hungry chaps with nothing to lose and everything to gain.
Invest in them right away because they're only going up in the world.
Scrappy souls. They can of course be found on iTunes, Spotify, adventuringparty.net.
The Adventuring Party.
TheAdventuringParty.net.
We have a website.
You're not going to click on my voice, folks. You're going to click on a link in the description, or you're hearing us already. There's a few other places that turn up. Libsyn, Mongolia, Ukraine. Lots of
folks, if you liked this podcast, like, share, and subscribe, and tell your friends that you liked it. And if you don't like this podcast, like, share, and subscribe, and tell your friends that you liked it. Thank you.
Remember, angry emails. All the angry emails.
But for now,
this party's over.
Thanks for listening to The Adventuring Party. You can find show notes and links to things we've mentioned at www.theadventuringparty.net and on our Facebook page. You can leave comments there, or you can record a voice message at www.speakpipe.com/theadventuringparty. The hosts can be contacted directly by email at savageandscar@theadventuringparty.net. If you'd like to be in touch with the party all the time, come join our Discord server, link in the show notes. The Adventuring Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike version 3 license.